For generations, the name Sparta has echoed through the halls of history, a word synonymous with discipline, austerity, and unparalleled military might. But the popular image of a few hundred warriors making a glorious last stand only tells a fraction of the story. Sparta was not just an army, it was a state, a society, and a culture engineered for one purpose alone: survival through absolute military dominance. To understand the Spartan, we must first understand the system that forged him. A system that began not on the battlefield but in the cradle. This is the story of the Lacedaemonians. From their legendary origins and the iron laws that defined them, through their ultimate moments of glory to the slow, inevitable fall of the perfect warrior state. The foundation of the Spartan way of life is shrouded in legend, attributed to the lawgiver Lycurgus sometime in the Archaic Age. Whether he was a real man or a mythical figure, the laws he established, the great Retra, were profoundly real. Before Lycurgus, Sparta faced chaos and internal conflict. His reforms were a radical, total transformation, stripping away luxuries, dissolving class divides among citizens, and making military training the sole occupation of all Spartiate men. The economy was restructured. Gold and silver currency was abolished, replaced by iron spits, cumbersome and worthless outside of Laconia. Private ownership of land was curtailed. The citizen body, the homoioi, the equals, were now bound together by a radical commitment to state before self. This dual structure, an elite warrior class living in perpetual readiness, supported by a vast enslaved workforce, the helots, was the engine of the Spartan state. It was a perilous balance, demanding constant, absolute vigilance. Politically, Sparta was an anomaly in Greece, not a democracy like Athens, nor a tyranny, but an oligarchy, ruled by a unique blend of institutions. At the top sat two hereditary kings from the Agiad and Eurypontid families. Their power was primarily religious and military. On campaign, one king was the supreme commander. But at home, their power was checked. The true power rested with the 5 ephors, annually elected magistrates who could audit the kings, oversee the agoge, and even declare war. They were the watchdogs of the Retra, ensuring the survival of the Lycurgan system. This system of checks and balances, the Gerousia, the Council of 28 Elders, providing advice and judicial oversight, made Sparta arguably the most stable government in the Greek world for centuries. But stability came at a cost. Total conformity. The Spartan life began with a trial. Every newborn boy was brought before the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, who judged if the child was fit to live. If deemed healthy and robust, the child was permitted to live. If judged sickly or deformed, the tales say the infant was exposed on Mount Taygetus. A brutal measure ensuring only the strongest survived. For the first 7 years, the boy was raised by his mother, undergoing a preparation designed not to soften him but to harden him. They were trained to be silent, to be fearless in the dark, and never to cry. This was the final taste of a normal childhood. At the age of 7, the boy was no longer his mother's son. He belonged entirely to the state. The agoge was the crucible of the Spartan. It was a rigorous state-sponsored system of education, training, and indoctrination that lasted from age 7 until 30. The goal was to break the individual and mold an unyielding, disciplined, cooperative machine. Boys were purposefully underfed, forcing them to learn to steal, not for survival but as a practice in cunning and stealth. The punishment for being caught? Not the theft itself, but the lack of skill in executing it. They wore only one cloak per year, slept on beds of reeds cut by their own hands, and walked barefoot regardless of the season. Literacy was minimal, focusing on only what was necessary. They learned to speak laconic, short, precise, and witty. Brutality was a constant companion. Boys were pitted against each other to foster a ferocious competitive spirit. Beatings and ritual humiliations were standard, designed to build endurance to pain and an unbreakable spirit. By age 20, the Spartan was a soldier, a hoplite. But he was not yet a full citizen. For 10 more years he would live in the barracks, dedicating his life entirely to the syssitia, the communal mess hall, and his military duties. While their men were forged in the barracks, Spartan women stood apart from all others in the Greek world. They were not cloistered, nor relegated to the spinning wheel. Their role was as crucial as the men's, to produce strong, healthy children for the state. Their education, though separate from the agoge, was equally focused on physical fitness and strength. Spartan women competed in athletic games, sang, danced, and received a formal education. This freedom and their ownership of property, a right virtually unheard of elsewhere, gave them immense status. They were the domestic managers, controlling the family's kleros and helots while their husbands were away. It was a Spartan mother who presented her son with his shield, with the infamous command, "Return with it or upon it." Their loyalty was absolute, not to the man but to the state and its success in war. They were respected, often feared, and ultimately essential. No warrior state could survive without the mothers who birthed the warriors. The entire Spartan system rested on a foundation of terror. The Helots, the conquered people of Messenia and Laconia, vastly outnumbered the Spartiates, perhaps by a factor of 10 to 1. They were not typical slaves, they were serfs, perpetually bound to the land. Their labor provided the food and resources that freed the Spartiate men for full-time military service. To maintain control, the Spartans employed brutal psychological and physical tactics. Annually, the ephors would formally declare war on the Helots, allowing any Spartiate to kill a Helot without legal consequence. The Crypteia, composed of elite Spartan youths, would patrol the countryside, executing any Helot they considered a threat or simply too strong, too intelligent, or too proud. It was a calculated policy of state-sponsored terrorism. This ever-present fear of revolt was the very reason Sparta could never deploy its full army far from home for long. The Helots were their foundation and their ultimate liability. On the battlefield, the Spartan citizen was known as the hoplite, named for the massive circular shield, the hoplon. But it was their discipline forged in the agoge that made them legendary. Their tactic was the phalanx, a wall of overlapping shields propelled by a mass of highly trained, coordinated men. Other Greeks fought in the phalanx, but the Spartans drilled relentlessly, moving as a single lethal unit. The Spartan position was almost always the right flank, the place of honor, but also the place of most brutal impact. Their legendary discipline allowed them to execute complex maneuvers mid-battle, maintaining formation where others would crumble into a chaotic rout. It was a brutal head-on collision, often short, decisive, and terrifying. To break the Spartan line was almost impossible. To stand against it was to face the fury of a state perfected for war. By the 5th century BC, Sparta's preeminence on land was unchallenged in Greece, but a far greater storm was brewing in the east. The mighty Persian Empire under Xerxes was preparing to engulf the Greek world. Though Athens had first stood alone at Marathon, it was the threat of Xerxes' second massive invasion that finally united the fiercely independent Greek city-states into a fragile coalition, led by Athens on the sea and Sparta on land. The fate of Greece now rested on the decision of a few men and the courage of the Spartans, who were destined to make their legendary stand in a narrow pass known as the Hot Gates. In 480 BC, at the pass of Thermopylae, King Leonidas, a man who traced his lineage to Heracles, led a small force to hold the gateway to Greece. His initial contingent included just 300 full Spartan citizens. Against them, the immense army of Xerxes. For 2 days, the Spartan-led Greeks repelled every assault. The narrow pass nullified the Persian numbers, and the relentless discipline of the phalanx proved impenetrable. But a betrayal came. A local man, Ephialtes, showed the Persians a hidden mountain path that bypassed the pass. Leonidas, aware his position was now impossible, made his final heroic choice. He dismissed the main body of the Greek army, keeping only his 300 Spartans plus a few hundred Thespians and Thebans to cover their retreat. They remained to die. On the 3rd day, the remaining forces fought to the last man. Leonidas fell, and the Spartans died defending his body. The ultimate sacrifice, a strategic defeat, but a moral and propaganda victory that inspired all of Greece. Thermopylae bought time. The following year, in 479 BC, the Spartan army, led by the regent Pausanias, met the full Persian force again at the Battle of Plataea. This time, it was a total victory. The Spartan heavy infantry shattered the Persian lines, killing the general Mardonius and effectively ending the Persian invasion of Greece forever. Sparta was now the undisputed hegemon, the leader of Greece on land. For the next century, its military dominance would define Greek politics, culminating in the titanic struggle against its great rival Athens. The rivalry between the land power Sparta and the sea power Athens was inevitable. In 431 BC, the Peloponnesian War began, a devastating 27-year conflict that tore the Greek world apart. Sparta's initial strategy relied on invading Attica, but Athens retreated behind its long walls. The war became a slow, grinding stalemate, only broken by Athenian naval expeditions and moments of shocking Spartan failure. The low point for Sparta came at Sphacteria, where over 120 Spartan citizens were captured by Athenian forces. An unprecedented humiliation that shook the very foundation of the warrior state's reputation for invincibility. Yet Sparta ultimately prevailed, thanks to brilliant generals like Lysander and critical aid from their former enemy, Persia. The final Athenian surrender in 404 BC placed the entire Greek world under Spartan hegemony. At the pinnacle of its power, the perfect state began to fracture. The long wars, constant deployment, and the strict rules of the Rhetra led to a devastating crisis. The decline of the citizen population, the oliganthropia. Spartan citizens were dying in battle faster than they could be replaced. Furthermore, the influx of wealth and land inequality, forbidden by Lycurgus, began to corrupt the equals. The system that had created the perfect warrior state was slowly consuming itself. The discipline remained, but the numbers did not. The vulnerability of Sparta's narrow base of power was about to be exposed. The challenge came from Thebes. In 371 BC, at the Battle of Leuctra, the Theban general Epaminondas deployed a revolutionary tactic, the oblique order, concentrating his forces on a massive reinforced left flank. The result was a catastrophic, unimaginable defeat. The Spartan battle line was utterly broken, and nearly 400 Spartiates, including one of their kings, were killed. The myth of Spartan invincibility was irrevocably shattered. Following Leuctra, Epaminondas invaded the Peloponnese, freeing the Helots and establishing the city of Messene. The foundation of the Spartan state was ripped out from beneath them. Sparta would continue to exist for centuries, even under Roman rule, reinventing itself as a nostalgic monument to its own glorious past. But its military and political relevance was gone. Yet the legacy of the Spartan endures. The word Spartan itself has become a shorthand for self-denial, courage, and iron discipline. A standard of human endurance that has inspired cultures, armies, and philosophers across millennia. They succeeded in their primary goal, to create a state that would never be forgotten. For the perfect warrior society, a glorious death in battle was merely the final and most celebrated act of service.